What should be in your portfolio? Should it be your best work? Should it be the work that shows what you're capable of? Should it be your most conceptual work? No, no, and no. Maybe. And the reason that it's no, no, and no is that all of that stuff is highly subjective, and what you want to focus on is the idea that the portfolio is a tool designed to open certain doors for you. And that before you even get involved in a conversation about what should be in there, you should know what kind of doors you're trying to open. Welcome to the MVA Studio vlog. This episode spends most of its time in a classroom talking one-on-one with students of all ages about what they're trying to do and what work needs to be in the portfolio to do that. In addition, we get into process books, which most process books suck, and it's a wasted opportunity to make a kind of bonus portfolio project. So I'm on this bumpy road right now, but I'm just recording this weird little aside that I might not even use, but I do all the editing of this vlog. Not a humble brag, because the editing is not great. It is probably just below acceptable, but it means that I hear all these episodes multiple times. You know, editing it, I probably listen to each episode twice at least, solid, maybe 3 times. And then again, once it's been posted, I listen to it at least a 3rd time on YouTube so that I can understand it in context. And I think that's where a lot of the improvements have been coming from. One of the things though that doing everything myself makes me really aware of, I recognize what streets or blocks are too bumpy and what kind of surfaces suck for recording on. For example, and this is so dumb, but this bridge that we're on right now, talking into the camera, yeah, I just hear the weird hum of a concrete bridge. But when I go to edit it, it's gonna sound totally different and sound terrible, and I'm sorry I'm doing this, but I'm still not sure I'm gonna use it. But then I know, like, oh, that's a surface that you have to be quiet on, and there are things like streets that don't seem that bumpy, and now I know, oh, you can't record on those. You know, 9 times out of 10, I don't record when the blinker's on. I don't have anything deep to say there. It's just an observation.
That's another good observation.
In case the Painting in the Woods company does not call, what would be like a dream graphic design client?
If you watched the last episode 96, that started this thing of these one-on-one conversations from a workshop I held last summer at Minneapolis College of Art and Design, then you know that all of these students got a 4-question survey to answer before they showed up to this workshop so that I could take some time and try to analyze their particular problems. So before we get into the feedback part of it in the conversation, I'm gonna read those surveys real quickly. So, number 1, what are you doing now? I'm the sole graphic designer on the marketing team at an orthopedics company. I am in a good stable place, but 9 to 5 is soul sucking, and I would love to incorporate more freelance involving actual art making. What do you want to be doing? I want to be working a part-time graphic design role with a more rounded out freelance pet portraiture business, which is kind of wild. 3, what do you think is missing from your portfolio? More fleshed out examples of my design work. It's easy to throw a PDF or a postcard onto a website, but the thing in the place gives it more context. Also doesn't even have a real website yet. So, couple of thoughts on this. So this is a person who's been working for maybe 5 years at one single place, but luckily has a well-rounded portfolio that is not all the same visuals. So any of you who have worked in-house, you know how much it can suck when you get out of a job and you have like 5 years of work that all looks the same or all is the same. That could suck. But luckily she doesn't have that problem. But one of the things that she does need to do is spend some time gathering up all the actual stuff and figuring out what format is going to make it look the best and have the most amount of context. So watch that. And then lastly, what's in your portfolio? So for this orthopedics company, a 2017-2018 year in review, kind of like an annual report, grand opening materials, so all the signage and postcards and ads and stuff, an annual report, and a program for high school sports physicals, and a kind of editorial spread. And she used to do book design. So there's some book design and another book design series project. Mostly this one company, mostly print, but some stuff that's expansive and kind of campaigny.
All right, I got some questions then. Is the book stuff old? Like how do you define old? Like 5 years or like 15?
5 years old.
Okay. 1, remove the dates. Solve that problem. 2, I would worry less about things being old and more about if they look really specifically of a time. And if that time isn't like 20 years ago, you know, because like if your stuff looks really like I saw like some old like website of this guy that designed like records in the 70s, like that's awesome. If it looks specifically like 2014, not so cool. You know what I mean? And I guess the other thing is like to think about this idea of if somebody sees this and comes to me and says, I want that, are you going to be like, no? You know what I mean? Or you can be like, all right, cool, you can have that, or you can have something similar to that. I think that's like a better gauge of what to edit or what to keep or kill than just the idea that it's 5 years old. You know what I mean? Because like, who knows? Maybe, well, one, maybe you were like brilliant 5 years ago. Maybe it's like the best stuff. I wouldn't just get rid of something because of like an arbitrary date. Instead, I would get rid of it based on like, am I willing to stand behind this piece of work today? I think maybe one of the things to look at is there stuff in here that you can extract and expand into areas you haven't worked in on the idea of like, if I were to do this is how I would do it, so that you do at least cover off on more kind of mediums than might be made in reality. I would think really heavily about that. Essentially, like, is it as sexy as it can possibly be? And then I would probably, at that point, like really go like, okay, I just need to make new stuff that falls outside of this world. The other thing is like, it's not terrible that it's all from the same place, but at the same time, it's all from the same place. Like there's so many things that could be like, it could be a weird fluke that you're any good. Like, cause it could literally be like, I don't know, maybe the CD there is really good and all the designers suck and they just do what the CD says, you know what I mean?
Our next one. What are you doing now? I'm a designer and production manager at a print shop. This is actually missing something. She's also a student in the online master's program at MCAD. What do you want to be doing? I'd like to be freelancing remotely on projects with a wide range of components, i.e. web and print. I really enjoy publication design, so a lot of that and some web development as well. So it sounds like information heavy, content oriented work. And she wants to freelance remotely because she literally wants to live in a van. What do you think is missing from your portfolio? I'd like more web design and development work in my portfolio. It's heavy on publication design and branding at present. And then lastly, what's in your portfolio? Need magazine and article design for Humanitarian magazine, article design and style guide for 32 magazine, logo branding and marketing pieces for a kids art studio, logo branding and marketing pieces for a professional organizing business, Bad Feminist Reader publication design of 2 articles about feminism, the Travel Doodler, a pocket scavenger hunt city guide, travel journal design and illustration. So it really is pretty much just editorial information type design and a couple of brands. Okay, so we got another person that's kind of after the all around, like, I'd like to do a bunch of different stuff, which it's important to understand how you want to spend your days. And I think a lot of people get freaked out about that, but there's nothing wrong with that whole thing of liking the thrill of doing a lot of different stuff. That's still a goal. So what this person said is like, I think they're interested more in that kind of lifestyle design approach, which is that they want the work to be integrated and support their life in a way where in the big picture they can be doing the kind of stuff they want to do, like live out of a camper or whatever, and while they're at their desk be doing that work that feeds them, which is obviously a great idea. One, I saw a branding project that didn't mention any web development or a website. That's one of the first things that I would go after is design the website for this brand. You need it. In that context, I think it's a depth project. It just depends on how you pitch it. So you can make it a width project, but you just show a homepage and maybe one other page or something, and that becomes part of the story of the brand. But if you're after people hiring you to do web design, then I would take the brand as the groundwork and then design a killer website. Now the thing, of course, is like that's harder to leverage. All it means is that a bunch of fairly surface decisions are probably made about typography and image and color palette. But then there's this special stuff that you need to bring to it, which is about structure, flow, rhythm, interactive elements and that kind of stuff. But who knows, maybe that's so fun that as long as those other decisions are made, it makes life easier.
You have in here a couple things where it's like article designs for other magazines. One thing that I wonder about is, can you do a kind of feature article presentation of those things for the web? Like when you go on Pitchfork and there's like a feature interview with somebody that's not on the template, that's like the first thing that I saw, because it was like, you don't have to design a website, but you're pointing in the direction, and then you can like take what you've already invested in the design of those. I think you have 2 or 3 on here. 2. You've already figured out the look and feel, so now you could like take that and then focus on the interaction, loading, the rhythm of the page, all of that kind of stuff. And it's weird because the way people are, it's like if you apply like literally like print design basics to the web, they don't see that anyway. They still go like, oh, good, you do websites. It doesn't matter that like, you're like, well, yeah, it was exact same principles as like how I designed this thing. They're just like, oh, cool, you do websites. I think along the same lines, you have a couple of branding projects. Are those like the kind of branding projects that are governed by reality? So push further is what I would say. Like you have this one, marketing pieces for a kid's art studio. Literally make a list of every single thing that place could do with like, you don't want to be like stupid about it because it's not, you know, like what's stupid at this point? It's so cheap to make anything on the planet. Because I was like, you don't want to make you don't want to propose a 2-hour documentary, except that you could totally do that and it would be a completely reasonable thing to do in 2019. So I would make like a list of everything you could do for those businesses and then start knocking off what stuff fits to build out the portfolio in the way that you want. I would always go with like the most obvious public facing stuff first, and then to the more special stuff. And we haven't kind of got into this too much, but there's a really important thing to think about. Depending on how you do a project, there's like either width or depth to it. So if you design an article for a magazine, that's like a depth thing, right? It's about these multiple surfaces and it's about how they interact with each other. Doing the branding, if you do that based completely in reality, that's a kind of a depth thing, because it's going to be like you're going to pay a lot of attention to how you typeset the business card, because like it's literally like 5 pieces, so you have to pay attention to that. But if you go like, it's really more about the concept of the brand and telling the story of that concept, you move into this width idea. At that point, it almost doesn't matter what the typesetting on the business card is like, because when you see the business card, you see it in the context of a larger presentation of a bunch of different things. So suddenly if you go like, they need a magazine, you don't have to design the magazine, you have to design the cover of 1 to 2 issues of the magazine and maybe one spread, and it never needs to be seen bigger than this. So this idea of like being like, okay, how do you blow the thing out? The idea is not to propose a million things and then be like, okay, cool, now you're editing a documentary. The idea is to go like, okay, these are the things I could do. How could I tell the story of them? And then if it's reasonable that a documentary would be a thing, well, like how do you get that across without doing it? And it's literally like frames and a couple bits of like motion graphics. It's like this, but it tells the story of it. So that's like a thing to think about in terms of what it is that you're trying to do. You know, like if you decide what you want to do is be a full-on magazine designer, then it's entirely about that depth idea. But if what you want to do is work in the world of publishing, then it's like a width idea. Now, obviously, you can do both within the same project, but with these things of like pushing the brand further, don't get caught up in the captions on the Instagram post. It's gonna be like, here's a picture. Because like the point is to be like, here's your strategy. You want to be like, you know, that 10,000 feet kind of view.
What are you doing now? Just finished my first year in that same master's program at MCAD and looking for internships. What do you want to be doing? I want to work at either a design agency doing a variety of work, including some or all of the following: web design, front-end web development, branding, digital design, print design, interaction design, illustration. And it says in parentheses, sorry, I haven't nailed this down completely yet, working on it. What do you think is missing from your portfolio? More developed web design and development projects, possibly something with a focus on UX, UI, more illustration work. And then lastly, what's in your portfolio? Branding for a church logo, so it's logo and identity design. App design and identity for a bikeable beer adventure app. It's got an advertising campaign and the branding and the UI. It sounds like a school project, but maybe it's not. Personal branding. Editorial illustration about sugary drinks like juice. An illustration, like kind of an info illustration of vegetables for a CSA, portfolio website, alphabet project, which is a hand-drawn typeface, Roman glyphs and basic punctuation. And then it says curated identities, book layout design for a reader containing 2 articles about identity. Okay, so similar to that feminism one. So here's the thing to think about if you're a student. This person, their portfolio is kind of all over the place, and it's in large part governed by the assignments that she's getting. And there's nothing wrong with that. But a thing to think about, if you haven't gone and done any portfolio reviews or informational interviews, you want to start doing those. And the reason that you want to start doing them is you want to make sure that you can fill the gap between what you're being assigned in classes and what the world wants to see from you in terms of the volume or the shape of the work. Not in terms of the specifics, not in terms of the concepts or anything like that, or the aesthetics, but in terms of it being relatable to them, which I think I get into in this segment. But really, almost as soon as you're making work that you feel serious about, I would start getting portfolio reviews and informational interviews kind of ASAP. And if it is not abundantly clear, do not get them from teachers. Unless those teachers hire graphic designers. Go out to the designers and illustrators in your community and get them to look at your work and get them to be brutally honest, because you're not there for a job. You're there for a portfolio review. So I'll give them the space to just say everything that's on their mind. You will benefit tremendously. I didn't do this. It was really stupid. I got out of school with a super asinine portfolio that gave me nothing but blank stares. And I did an unpaid internship after school to build up work that made sense to people. So, be forewarned. Okay, but all of that said, let's get into talking to this person about sort of what it is what they can do with their present body of work. Since they don't know what they want to do, it's not a great idea to get into like what should be in the portfolio. I think it's more about what in here is low-hanging fruit to improve.
So ultimately, like a design agency or a good branding, or like I don't know, interesting branding agency would be kind of the avenue, because you'd get to do a lot of different work for a lot of different clients.
Yeah.
Fair to say. And how far are you into the that master's program?
1 year.
Okay, you're like early. Knowing that you're in that program now, this makes a lot of sense. That alphabet project,
Yes.
what's the context of it?
So our teacher was like, find a ruler, make a typeface. You can only use the ruler to create the typeface. So it's like this kind of concept of like working within a restriction, and I created something that I actually like.
What's its context though? Is it like a alphabet on a page?
I have posters made with it on it. I have it on a page, like the alphabet on a page. But I have it like multiple posters.
What are the posters about?
Candy.
Okay, so they have like a content.
Yes.
So here's the kind of fast thing I would say is, if that font looks good, and it looks good without doing anything to it, which is often the case with those like fonts because I've seen them a lot, turn it into something very real. So like if it looks killer on its own, turn it into a record cover and then flesh that out as like the packaging and campaign. If it looks really, really killer, just make the font an identity system in and of itself. Because like I've definitely seen versions of that assignment where it was like, this looks so killer, if you just put any word in it, it would be fine. Just make it the identity system. So, because the other thing is, that project is weird in and of itself. But if it looks like legitimately good, turn it into something relatable. Like when you're at that student level and you're trying to figure out where you need to go with stuff, just think about the idea of like, is this relatable? And relatable doesn't necessarily mean normal. It means, can the person wrap their head around it without needing an explanation of the process? The ideal thing is to be like, this is an identity system. And then be like, whoa, what's the deal with the font? And then you're like, oh, this is how I made it. Because like it's the process becomes the value add or the plus one. But nobody wants to sit through and hear about like that process, because it's just like, you're never going to do that again professionally. So it doesn't bring
value.
Yeah, because no one goes like, oh, well, cool, I'm going to hire you to do that weird thing that you did.
Yep.
It's unclear how it will ever benefit them, so it's neat. And it's neat as an exercise, but as a portfolio piece, it's flat. But if you can take that same thing, turn it into a real project, and then go, this is how I made it, that's kind of amazing. Personal branding is really kind of a hard one, because like everyone expects a designer to have a brand, so it doesn't feel like a project. But unless you can blow it out more to where it's not a project, but it encompasses everything in such a way. Someone who told me the story about hiring designers at the Walker, like hiring the fellows, and they were like, there was one person I can think of where we hired them off the portfolio, not off the work in the portfolio. The thing the person had made at the end to hold everything, that ended up being the piece that they thought was the breakthrough. And it's not like they said, oh, here's this book I designed and blah, blah, blah. It was literally like, here's my portfolio. And they had this conversation. They were like, the portfolio is incredible. It's actually better than the work it's designed to hold. And like, that was this notion. So like, you kind of can't, obviously you can do anything, but you kind of can't go anywhere and have your one branding or two branding projects, have one of them be like, here's my brand. But you can articulate it to such an extent as it holds everything, that stuff is immediately impressive. And without looking at it, like I don't know that, but you can start to think about, can you make sure it's not reasonable? Like in that same thing that we're talking about, like things being realistic, like that's great for budgets. It's not great for the imagination.
And then I had a couple people show up to the class who'd like signed up that day. So I wasn't able to get that survey from them. This first one is a guy who has been a creative director at a coffee brand for at least 5 years, possibly more, maybe as long as 8 or 10. And I think his big concern is, what do I do next? And is it bad that all my work is from the same place about the same thing. And so we kind of talk through that a little bit and about the importance of how you frame what it is you do, and the idea of creating the thing that you want to do. Like, yes, you could go and be the creative director somewhere, but maybe there's a new model that encompasses your interests while still bringing value to other people. So, coffee guy. Like with agencies, like I don't know, because agencies all suck, and they want to make sure you're sitting in that chair and stuff like that. You know, they love to be like, do whatever it takes to be creative, but as long as you're sitting there. Not all of them, obviously, but then you see that, like, you see a lot of those kinds of postings for tech companies, which of course, like, isn't working with a million different clients, but on the other hand, it might be working with different teams, but they seem to be way more open to that. And I think one of the things is, like, starting to research that might also help in figuring out what stuff may or may not be missing from the portfolio. And also, I think that you may discover that if you were acting as creative director and overseeing a lot of different kinds of work, and you know how all these sort of tech startups hire, is they tend to be in this kind of everybody figure out everything, and then later we'll figure out who's good at what, that it might be a really natural fit to actually find a remote gig with a tech startup or something like that. But then I'd also take that time to think about okay, what's the thing I actually want to be doing, so that you are framing the portfolio in a way where it's making the argument for I am the person to do this thing for you, whatever that role is. Because maybe you don't actually want to touch a computer. You literally do want to be the person that's just managing the team and getting the best work out of them, in which case how you frame everything in your portfolio kind of radically changes. People are stupid, and they make bad decisions all the time, so there's no sense in not doing something because you're waiting for it to be fucking amazing. Meanwhile, someone else is stealing your lunch because they didn't wait for it to be amazing. So I just would make sure that idea doesn't hold you back from making the stuff that you need to make. But I do think getting that clarity of where you need to go with it is really helpful. Because in that, if you were no, I want a creative director position, you do want to be the jack of all trades. You do want to be I can help a team or build a team to do this, and this. And it just kind of depends on what it is you're trying to do and how you want to spend your time. But I think the fact that you've done all of that stuff for one brand, it could be a liability on some fronts, because it can be okay, cool, more coffee. Yeah. It could also be oh wow, this person managed to do all of this stuff and we need all of this stuff done as well. Yeah, and it could be a consultant type thing too, maybe working with places that have a design team but don't have a CD or don't have that senior level of kind of quality control that role brings to it, and more the person that kind of comes in and helps out. Not so much a full-time CD, but also not so much as a freelance designer, but more in the way that a startup might have a branding consultant or a marketing consultant. That same sort of idea, which again is it's not I invented that, that's a thing, and seems potentially, just at least on paper, a viable kind of option. And then of course also just make sure that you're turn your ego up on high, and don't turn this into a thing you procrastinate on. Turn it into, I can't wait till I dig through all my old shit. This is fantastic. It's a good thing. Or you look through it and you cringe, but it's great because 2 years later you don't cringe anymore. A reasonable thing would be to work with a place that's got a scrappy design department and come in once every 3 months, present work and talk with them. And literally only act as someone who helps them do better work, not as the
like normal CD of like, oh, have you thought about this and do this and blah, 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 to be like, my job is simply to improve, this sounds condescending, I don't mean it that way, but like improve your designers by showing them examples and ways of working and giving them feedback and whatnot, but not being the yes or no authoritarian CD. That's kind of loosely the idea that I was bubbling about in my head.
Sounds like a great job.
Nice work if you can get it.
And our last one of these series of portfolio videos, and again, if you haven't watched the previous two, actually, episodes 95 and 96. 96 has more topics like this, as well as a kind of lecture on why it's so, what gets in the way of making new portfolio work. And episode 95 goes into how you can expand your portfolio in a week or so. No joke. So watch those. Here's our last one. This person has been working in agencies since they got out of school, probably 6 years at Think at 2 agencies, and they want out. And actually she had quit already, but she wants to go into essentially illustration for apparel. I mean, essentially like working in Southern California on brands like Vans or Roxy or Quicksilver or whatever, and not having a portfolio that's totally there yet in terms of that desire. And then still having a portfolio of this agency stuff, some of which is really cool, but it doesn't totally make sense. But how do you leverage the right pieces? But also, how do you just have the confidence to leave it in the past?
Yeah.
Because like every brand treats their agencies like shit.
Oh, no, yeah.
And so it's like, it doesn't matter, like, you know, like Target treats their employees great and then brutalizes their agencies. Again, not on YouTube. Probably in-house lifestyle brand,
Yeah.
California. So one of the things I think I would throw out there and think about this, and I kind of like made a mention of that like 60-40 idea of like a portfolio. Like if you want to do like, let's say you would decide tomorrow, I want to be a book cover designer. Like you keep your portfolio, but then you get ready to replace 60% of it with book covers. You don't want all book covers because that's boring. That's just as boring as all healthcare or all one brand or all whatever. It doesn't matter how cool the shit you do is. If it's all the same, ultimately it's like, oh great, another rock show poster. It like just doesn't matter how great it is. But so it's like you have the 60% geared towards something where you're like overwhelmingly like that person. And then the 40% to be like, oh yeah, I can do all this other stuff. The flip side to that, I think, is you have the evenly distributed, well-rounded portfolio. Like if you go to a traditional design program, like that's what they make you produce. It's a terrible idea. It only works if there is a distinct, either there's like a single industry and you're like, I'm the whatever, farm equipment person, right? Or the coffee, actually. Like let's say for the sake of argument, you were like, nah, coffee, that's it forever. The well-rounded thing is exactly what you want, because then you're like, that the focus comes through the vertical, not through the work. What you're talking about, like you kind of got to pick one. It sounds like making the stuff is the thing that's appealing on some level, but it could be that you flip it and you go, it's well-rounded, but it's focused on surf. Or you go like, it's well-rounded, but 60% of it is now print and apparel graphics or something like that. And then whatever else is in there is to show range, ambition, context. Yes, I can make whatever, the sidewall pattern of a shoe, but I can also design a pop-up shop. So that like you get that focus of like, oh shit, this person knows how to do something, because that's super important. But then it's like, oh, and they know how to do all this other stuff, which I feel like is the kind of thing that keeps coming up, is like that idea of the icing on the cake. You want that to be really well integrated, but you definitely want to kind of show like, I can do this thing. And furthermore, like I'm passionate about doing this thing. The person that wants to be the book cover designer, but only has one book cover, out of all the people in the world that want to do book covers, even if your one is the very best one in the history of it, there's someone else whose portfolio is 20 pieces and 17 of them are book covers, or 25 or whatever, and it's like, that person loves book covers. Like, who do I want to hire? So I think I'm figuring out what you can extract from your current work and then rounding it out with what are the biggest, most ambitious, like, kind of oh shit moments that like piles on top of that. Again, and then moving. Because like the other thing is like people hire who's around. And it's like all the music packaging designers are largely in LA and then New York. And all the footwear designers are in Portland or Boston. And all the fashion designers are blah, blah, blah. Like, or all the museum designers are in New York, more or less. Just being in the right kind of circle of people. Because you can apply for a job at Billabong or Vans or whatever, like fairly easily. But like, will they even talk to you if you're not in Huntington Beach? Not really. But I think like you knowing that like, this is the thing I want to do, that solves so much of the problems. And then the only thing you have to deal with is there any kind of block that's keeping you from making the stuff that you need to make? Because otherwise, like I would be like, don't expand any of this. Like pick the best ones and leave the rest of it in the past so that you can do like the direction that you want to go down. All right, so that concludes that part of this workshop. The show that's in the like kind of balcony gallery down here, the Concourse Gallery, which is post-bac program that sadly is ending. But it occurs to me that a huge chunk of the work in that show came out of conversations identical to this. So someone made a thing and it was like, this thing isn't relatable. What if you do this? And then suddenly there was like this killer thing, or there's a project down there, God, what is it called? It's a film festival. It's about imaginary friends. So the process behind that was that we spent that whole semester doing just tons of research and designing a poster. Once the poster was done, the process was break apart the poster and there's your identity system, which is kind of runs counter to like if I was designing an identity system, I'd be thinking system, 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 or let's make a logo, then let's pick a color palette. And what we did instead was like, we spent, God, I don't know how long the class is, 4 months or something, 3.5 months. But we didn't look at design work until probably October, late October, and it was posters at that point, and everyone was confused as to how this was ever going to be an identity for a film festival. And it was like, once the poster was done, like, okay, cool, what are the elements that make the poster? And it's like, you've got the type, the color, the composition, the blah, blah, blah. And if you run into something that's not solved by that, cool, now you've invented a new aspect of that identity system. And I think like that's one of those things where it's like, it didn't come up here, but it may, but it's like, if you have an event poster and you are like, I need some kind of branding project, just brand the event by deconstructing the poster. And like, as long as you let go of the notion of, well, my intent was to design a poster. If you let go of the idea that your intent is like this holy grail of stuff that matters, and you're like, okay, cool, I made this poster, it's for an event, there's no reason why the poster can't become the brand. And it's literally like you just shut off the part of you that made it and you go like, okay, well, what do I have here? And it's like you're gonna have typography, color, layout guidelines, image processing techniques, like whatever it might be, textures. You can like break them all apart, and now all of a sudden you have a set of brand guidelines for something that you never intended to be brand guidelines. And then from there, it's like, okay, cool. Now design that event. Like, what do the windows look like? What do the graphics, like what do the projected graphics look like? Or what do the tickets look like? That you actually have all the pieces if you go like, I'm gonna leverage the poster or whatever it is. So they didn't necessarily come up, but on the other hand, somebody might be sitting on like a couple of posters that they designed for something that literally within 3 days of like dedicated work, you could turn that into, it's no longer a poster, it's now like an experiential
design piece.
3 additional things just in terms of like upgrading the portfolio. One is just to upgrade the presentation, which I think is like a thing that we've touched on. And Jill mentioned Photoshop mockups, which I'm like the biggest fan in the world of now, and I was like very resistant to for some reason because I had this snooty attitude that like it had to be a photo of the thing because I'm like a weird purist. The other thing like is process books. And process books can be like kind of a problem if you don't make what is actually a good or compelling book. One, is everyone familiar with a process book is? So a process book is like, it's a document for like, let's say you're on a job interview and it's like a document of 1 to 2 projects from absolute 0 to finish. Like, how did you come up with the ideas? How did you appraise them? How do you develop them? Like, what are all the rejected versions and all of that stuff? They usually suck because they're determined by like a teacher as to like, oh, you have to do a process book. And so like they don't have any like book behind them. Like there's no story and there's no beginning, middle, and end. It's just like, oh, here's 28 pages of stuff. But if you have some projects with a significant volume of work that went into them, whether that's research or whether that's like iteration or sketching or whatever it is, but a serious process, I think a process book can be fantastic. And if you stop and actually then design a book so that the process book becomes a portfolio piece, because most of the time it's not. Most of the time it's a supplement to where you have the portfolio piece, the poster, whatever it is. The process book is just this thing that helps to support it as like, hey, here's how I think. But I think if you take a step back and you do like an actual research, analyze the research, come up with an idea about how that project developed, like what's the story of how that project developed? And then you design it like a real project. Yes, you have to design a book or a website or whatever, however you choose to show it. But the one thing is that you're leveraging all the labor that went into that project. So one thing I would say is if you don't have any like information heavy projects and you feel like you need them, that's a really good place to do it because you've already done all the work that went into it. You just have to organize it and determine like what's the story of it. So, and you can, I kind of think you can go in almost any format with this. So it's like if you want to do book design, make a couple process books. If you want to do web design, make a couple kind of feature pages or microsites to tell the story of a project. If you want to do like info heavy motion graphics, figure out how to turn that into a short, compelling video that tells the story of that design process. I would say the other thing is it makes you confront whether you have a process, because a lot of us don't. We could think we have a process, but what we really do is we fuck around till we run out of time and then we hope for the best. But if you like have an actual process, being able to document that, it's very compelling to people as well, because in the reality is that a lot of what designers describe as their process is this very reactive banging against the walls kind of like situation. And when someone actually like sees a book and they're like, wait, there's a method here? Like you actually know how you got from point A to point Z? That's pretty interesting for people. And if you think about that idea of like solving their problems, like how nice to be like, holy crap, if we hire this designer, I'm convinced that we never have to cancel client meetings because they couldn't come up with an idea. And we have to, like, we don't have to pretend like someone got deathly ill and we have to move the meeting back 2 days, whatever it is. And then one other strategy that defeats the point of this class, but may very well work, which is that you could not make anything for your portfolio and you could simply focus on making stuff that you feel like making. And when the appropriate things come along, pluck them out and be like, oh, this turned out cool. Maybe this is like a portfolio piece. And I mentioned that our website has an experimental section. It's really not. It's just every time I made a weird kind of designy screen print or a zine or did an in-class exercise where I thought, that turned out cool, then it made its way over there. It's not really every time I did something weird, because then it would be very watered down and diluted, but like it's a body of work that over time was like, this is interesting, throw it on the website. So I think that's another thing to think about, is like if you could just capture the byproducts of what you're doing and presenting them, or maybe you have to recontextualize them slightly, but that's a pretty valid way of going about it.
I will be very honest. If I were to develop a drug problem, it would almost certainly kill me, because I'm not the kind of person that is good at using leverage to make big lifestyle changes. So for me, the thing that works is contextual decisions. If convincing yourself of the gravity of a situation, if that doesn't make you stop procrastinating, let's say you want to make some new work, and what you're trying to do is convince yourself that by doing the new work, like a little mathematics problem, if I do this new work, then I can try to get these kinds of clients that will then get me this kind of money, that then will do this, this, and this, and then I will be whatever, rich and famous or deeply happy. That's the leverage Tony Robbins thing. There's so many reasons why it might not work. I just think if you're governed by short-term decision making, like you're impulsive, that stuff doesn't work. In general, you probably want to reserve it for those times when it really matters. So then you have the alternative, and the alternative is